If you have fear of being with people who don't look like you or think differently, then that's something you should resolve, because you can't live a life of fear.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I've been waiting to do this for quite some time, so thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's delightful to be here.
So if people are wondering where the here is, we are in Express Newark. We're in this really wonderful space that is a mixture of university and community. It's just a great place in order to have this great conversation. When we first met electronically, I knew about your work with the Inclusion Project. So let's start there. Tell me about this project. Tell me about how it animates you.
I started the project back in 2017, and the purpose for the project was really to dig deep into issues of educational equity, educational fairness. We have this case that I helped to facilitate, challenging school segregation in New Jersey, and I'm not litigating the case, so I'm not a lawyer in the case. I do occasionally advise the legal team, but what I understood was that this is a project that is about more than law. It's also about hearts and minds, and making sure that the communities who are most affected have a seat at the table, or have a place where their voice can be heard around these issues, because it's a complicated issue for a number of different reasons. This is a northern state. People aren't used to talking about segregation in the north. And so what I sought to do was to figure out different ways to bring people into the fold of the conversation. And since that time, we have, we're working with civil rights organizations, social justice organizations, faith groups, students, educators. So the inclusion part of the project is really to make sure that we're hearing from different people, getting different perspectives on this issue, because the only way really to make meaningful change is to make sure that as many people as possible have a seat at the table in figuring out what should be done.
That's beautiful. Now I'm going to be sort of a devil's advocate with you. You've talked now about this inclusion project, about bringing people together in a conversation, civil rights groups, religious organizations. But what's the role of the university? Why should we be doing this?
Rutgers-Newark in particular has a, I guess what I would describe as a public ethos, right? We try to be engaged with the world outside the university, understanding that the university is affected by the relationships that we have with people in Newark, certainly, and in other parts of the state. But as a public institution, I think, you're the president, so you may tell me differently. I think you might agree with me.
I'm not the boss of you. Go ahead.
But that we have an obligation to be engaged with these very pressing problems that are around us. And it would be hard for me to be at an institution that didn't understand that obligation and didn't take it seriously. And so to the extent that we can lend our expertise, and certainly we're engaging with researchers around the university on these questions, and to think about what we can contribute just based on our research and our scholarship. There are definite synergies there between the university as a research institution, as a public institution, and these very difficult problems. We have a role to play, I think.
It sort of feels to me like a sense of duty or an obligation of some sort. Is that fair to say?
I do sometimes wonder why I do this, because it is. I mean, it's a little nuts in some respects. But as someone who has had unbelievable amounts of opportunity in my life, as someone who has had grandparents and great-grandparents who actually have had some form of opportunity that they've passed on to me, And knowing in particular that there are generations of people who fought for my right, my ability, the opportunity to have a seat at the table. Knowing what I know about this problem, how could I not engage? And so I was a civil rights lawyer before I came to Rutgers. I directed the litigation program at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I worked on school desegregation cases in the South. I know the power and the force that segregation has in terms of the allocation of opportunity. And so, if it's not me, then who?
Yes, I mean, look, we were raised with, some would say that tired cliche, to whom much is given, much is expected. Yeah. That always struck me as a pretty fair deal, actually, that there is this notion of duty to serve and be of service. And I know that this is something that Chancellor Nancy Cantor with Newark has really talked about, the mission of Rutgers University Newark as being an anchor institution. I like to think Rutgers everywhere is an anchor institution. I mean, all of our campuses are in urban environments and really cater to populations, not exclusively, but significantly, who come from low resource backgrounds, may not have a family going tradition in terms of college education, and didn't have that gentle walk to the starting line that it sounds like you had. And I know from my personal experience that I certainly had as well. So it resonates with me. You mentioned you were at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. In the world that I know as a scholar, like, this is an organization with an incredibly proud and important history. You were there for a while. Now you're at Rutgers Law. Help me understand a little bit about your experiences at the fund, how that helped inform the work that you're doing now, or your decision to transition, and just, I want to understand more.
So I clerked for Judge Robert Carter. And Robert Carter was one of the key architects for Brown versus Board of Education. And it was important for me to clerk for him. I had another option, but I chose to clerk for him because of that deep history. And so even going to law school, I knew I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. I knew I wanted to work for the Legal Defense Fund.
Now I'm going to interrupt you very quickly.
Yeah.
When did you know you wanted to be a lawyer?
Oh, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer in college.
And a civil rights lawyer in particular?
In a civil rights lawyer.
So this is a path that you sorted out in college, you figured out your journey and went on the way. I mean, I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. 6 weeks of college made it clear I wasn't going to do that. And then I ended up this whole path here. So you figured this out in college, and then you're off and running.
I knew I wanted to be at the Legal Defense Fund. When I was in college, I took a course on African American history, and we watched this series called Eyes on the Prize. And that was my sophomore year in college. And when I saw Eyes on the Prize, I said, okay, that's it. That's what I want to do. After law school, I applied for a fellowship that started. The fellowship was 2 years at a law firm, and then 2 years at the Legal Defense Fund. And that's what eventually brought me into LDF. And I started out as a junior lawyer, litigating employment discrimination cases, affirmative action cases. I eventually left and I went into academia, but then I was called back. John Payton, who was then the president of LDF, asked me to come back to lead the litigation program. And he tragically passed away while I was there. And so but I knew I wanted to be at this storied organization for some of the reasons that I've already shared with you, which is that I know we have these persistent, deep racial inequities. LDF is on the front lines. That's the place for me. And it turned out to be just a really enriching experience doing this work on the front lines with people who are deeply committed. And so the through line to Rutgers, the opportunity to be on the faculty of Rutgers Law School in Newark came up very suddenly. It's interesting because when people heard that I was going to Rutgers-Newark, they said, that makes perfect sense to me. Knowing the history of the institution, knowing what Rutgers is about as a public university, the fact that we have such a diverse cohort of students at the law school, at the university generally, and especially at the law school, to be able to be in the classroom with first-generation students, that just, that's like nirvana for me. Being at Rutgers makes perfect sense in terms of my larger worldview.
You could teach pretty much anywhere. But there is something that you've told me personally before this interview, that there's something that speaks to you about the experience. And let's just go a little bit deeper into this choice. And this is not charity work. I want to be clear.
Yeah, no,
it's not charity work. but what makes this, how does this special? It resonates with you, obviously.
There's something really special about the opportunity to be in the classroom with students who, their family members may not even have graduated from high school or gone to college. And, they come in and they're not sure that they can do it. And then you get to that moment, that inevitable moment when you're teaching and the light goes on.
Yes.
And they get it. And then suddenly they see themselves as someone who will be a lawyer, or someone who will map out a life of opportunity for themselves. And so if I can play some role, that's, I sleep well at night, and I have a lot of fun at the same time.
Well, I can tell this is authentic because there's like a glow emanating from me right now as you're talking about this. But it is true, right? I mean, I've said it many different times, excellence can be found everywhere.
That's right.
And one of the great tragedies in this country, and I know it's not just here, but in this country, is that we have been acculturated, all of us, to presume that excellence looks a certain way, can only be found in a certain zip code, coming from a certain neighborhood. And while there's talent there too, to me, it seems incredibly short-sighted that we aren't investing our faith in all these other places, because it'll just stabilize the country if we start to bring everybody up, recognize their abilities. I mean, giving someone a sense of possibility and watching their mind ignite, there are very few things more thrilling than that, certainly as an educator. The Inclusion Project has been around for 5 years, if my memory serves, but you're wearing another hat now as a campus director of this new institute. Tell me a little bit about what this institute is, what your work there is, and what you hope for.
This is the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice. This was a project that was launched through the generosity of the Mellon Foundation. What I understand it to be is an institute that gathers scholars from around the university, because again, we operate on all 3 campuses, Newark, New Brunswick, and Camden, and identifies scholars who work in the areas of racial justice, who do research around racial justice, and supports their scholarship, supports their research, brings them into conversation with one another, and also just reaches out into the world to look at the many different ways in which anti-Blackness, issues of racism, percolate throughout our world. It's been a labor of love. We've been building it for about a year, or we built it for about a year. Now we've launched with 6 different postdoctoral fellows. We have early career fellows. We have senior faculty fellows. So we've brought a number of prominent scholars, scholars who are in the earlier phases of their career, people who are just coming into academia, and given them a home and a place where they can come and connect, share their research, share the questions they may have about future directions for their work. And so it's an incredibly rich experience. I'm fortunate that my co-directors are amazing people. They're poets, creative writers, a very prominent historian on New Brunswick's campus, Erica Dunbar, Patrick Rosal and Greg Pardlow are in Camden. So it's been a lot of fun, actually. I'm the only lawyer, thank goodness. It's just, I sometimes wonder, how did I make it into the Institute? But
well, I mean, I have my suspicions as to how you made it in. I mean, because the law crosses in so many different areas. It's one of the most flexible degrees one can get, actually, and it follows the passion. And since this institute is really interested in trying to secure a better future, frankly, a more just and equitable future, I mean, this is the work that you do. You're dealing with a lot of, for simplicity's sake, tough real-world situations in terms of our education system. This is what you talked about from the very beginning. And there's lots of head-scratching components, right, in the sense of this school desegregation. Think of New Jersey specifically. Just looking on a piece of paper, you have a very wealthy state that always seems to be broke. we have an excellent public school system, and yet tremendous gaps. Do you see ways forward?
So there's no question in my mind that we can get to a better place. We have some public schools that are thriving on paper in terms of their educational outcomes. But the key component that we're missing, I believe, is the opportunity for students from all these different backgrounds, racial, ethnic, language abilities, to learn together.
Right.
And I mean, just to sort of put a finer point on this, if when we separate children, as the state does through these laws that require students to go to school where they live, we have such stark housing segregation, residential segregation. And so, but when you separate children and they don't have the opportunity to come together and to see, right, to sit next to one another, to learn that person who may seem so different actually is not so different at all, right? They have very similar worries and concerns and wonderful days and days that are hard but also to be enriched by some of the different perspectives that they may bring into the classroom. We lose, I think, as a state when we don't create those options. And then there are also sort of material inequities that go along with that. Yeah. We can most definitely get to a better place. And this is really where my experience as a civil rights lawyer and understanding the historical context and how far we actually have come as a country really matters. Because if you take the long view and you think of it's funny saying this to a historian, but if we take the long view, if we take the long view and we look at how far this country has progressed, notwithstanding the fact that we still have very serious issues, we know that we are in a better place, but there's still more work to be done.
Yes.
And so if we can figure this out in the parts of the Jim Crow South, not to say that everything is all perfect there at all, there's still many challenges to be faced, but if we take the long view, we can get to a better place. Yes. I know. And in the school context, we have examples of plans that have been developed all over the country and experts who are sitting at the ready, waiting to jump in and help us design a different way.
I agree with everything that you said, and in fact, it resonates so loudly with a message I offered when I was introduced to the university. And I was just a few days beforehand, Jonathan put together some comments. How long? 5-7 minutes. I'm like, okay. And I just wrote about the beloved community. I actually thought it'd be a one and done statement. I didn't think it would become something that's critical to my presidency from a strategic standpoint. But one of the things I talk about with the beloved community is that the opportunity for discovery, for learning by bringing all people from all these different backgrounds together, that's what you want at a university. Yeah. We should be always curious and never presume the answer could only be found in this person or in that place. That's lazy, actually. But what's really critical is that the beloved community is not about the fact. I would not aspire for a community where we all agree.
Yep.
I mean, it'd make life easy on a particular day, and believe me, there are days. just let's all agree, can we?
Yeah, right.
But it's where we recognize we share something in common.
Yes.
And as soon as we acknowledge or even admit, which is a very loaded term there, if we admit we share something in common, the nature of our disagreement will be different. We can still disagree.
That's right.
But I'll know that Elise and I, we actually both want this thing for our child, or we both really like this color. I mean, just whatever. It could be really silly. But then we can connect on something.
That's right.
And it can be really mundane stuff. And it just seems, for me, as a historian, looking at different instances of denial of this kind of community, I just keep wondering, what are people afraid of? What are they afraid of? Because nothing else makes sense to me.
Well, and I think they're afraid of the unknown, right? People have been acculturated to growing up in environments and attending schools where people share the same experiences to some extent. And, and maybe this is sort of part of where my own personality or worldview sort of unfairly factors into it. But I think when if you're afraid of something, then that's the thing that you have to do.
Yes.
Right. And so if
maybe not skydiving.
Well, not skydiving.
Because I'm kind of afraid of skydiving.
I would not skydive. Let me just put that out there. Okay, there are limits.
There are limits.
but if you have fear of being with people who don't look like you or think differently from you, who maybe come from an entirely different place, then that's something there you should resolve, because you can't live a life of fear. And so the beauty of being in spaces with people who are different is exactly what you described. So those granular connections have a way of bringing people together in ways that you can't do through social media and Zoom. You can do some of it through Zoom, but being in that physical space makes a difference.
This is something I've said in a different context, is that we are social creatures. Human beings are social creatures. We aren't socially mediated creatures.
Yes.
We can use the technology, but we actually need this.
Yep.
And I really do think you're right, that the fear is a barrier that impedes discovery.
Yes.
And a university should always be about discovery.
Yep.
University should be about pushing against barriers.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're wrong, but that's okay. And then you learn from that process. I've been asking you all different kinds of questions. I've been learning about you. Do you have any questions for me?
What surprised you most about Rutgers?
That's a hard question for me to answer, because I accepted the position in late January of 2020. This virus was out there somewhere, but we thought then not in the US.
Right.
It's already here. 6 weeks later, my presidency that I was coming into changed radically.
Right.
And it became clear about a month after that, I'm like, the presidency I thought I had is gone.
Yeah.
And so that's just been a surprise, period. But that would have been the surprise anywhere. For me, I'm still discovering Rutgers and trying to figure out what are the things that surprise me or affirm for me, because I spent the whole first year in my house.
Yeah.
I mean, almost literally just in my house. So, in fact, that's why Faces and Voices was born, so I can get out and discover things. But there are some interesting surprises. I drove up from New Brunswick today to Newark for this interview. And at this point, I don't even keep count of the number of R's I see on the back of cars. I mean, Rutgers is everywhere. This past weekend, I was at a conference of viticulturists through the Agricultural Extension Station. And I spent an hour interacting with people who are growing grapes all over the state. I don't know the first thing about this, but this was all assisted by Rutgers experts. So the fact that we are the State University of New Jersey, for me, that's a radical change of scope, because I've been at other institutions that we were a university in thinking of like a column in this space. Right. Rutgers is everywhere, which makes the job daunting, but also terribly exciting, because when I let go of my fear, going into a conference talking about grapes, I don't know anything. I know what I like the taste of, but letting go of that fear, I actually had this amazing hour and a half learning. But the surprise, I'm learning about all kinds of things that were never on my register. And that's a thing of great joy. Now, one thing I will say that's affirming is that I love working with students, and you clearly do as well. And I was denied the chance to do that in my first year, beyond a few Zoom calls. I met 13 live students, like in the flesh, in my first year, in New Brunswick, out of a student population, undergrad population of 35,000. I met 13 of them. That's not acceptable. So what has been really wonderful, it's surprise? No, it's a hope that has been affirmed, is how exciting these students are, how curious they are, how resilient they are. That's been, maybe it's the depth of the resilience in this community that's been a surprise, but in the very best way. Thank you so much for our time together. Thank you for the work that you're doing, not just for the students in the law school, not just for the Newark community, but for the state of New Jersey, the state of the nation. I mean, a university should be in service of all these things, interact with somebody who's doing it at all these levels. That makes my job fun. So thank you. Thanks so much. My pleasure.